Well, I guess this will be a message from the living room. I want to say greetings in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to those listening. Grace and peace be unto you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Just very thankful to take opportunity to do this, because I listened to the brothers that also took opportunity to do this, and I was greatly encouraged. Appreciate that. I intend to go to Acts chapter 23 and 24. For those that have been following along with this, it's been quite interesting for me just to see what all happened with the Apostle Paul. Mostly the last couple of chapters have been quite informative on his ministries. So I just more and more very thankful for his encouraging steps and the things that he did with boldness and soundness and humility and truth. He went about life. He encourages me like those people in Hebrews chapter 11, chapter 12 then starts in saying about the great cloud of witnesses that we have, and I would think the Apostle Paul would qualify for being a part of a cloud of witnesses. And that's just yet another thing that we can be thankful to the Lord for, and just thank God for those opportunities to look to these people and be encouraged for their lives. So in context here, the Apostle Paul is coming back into Jerusalem after having been gone for quite a while. And if I understand right, he came back into Jerusalem with a couple different intents. And it was to bring some money, some relief money back to some of the church members perhaps, or it doesn't really say, and also to make certain sacrifices is what it says. That's what the reason he gives, that he had come back to Jerusalem when he's giving his story after he's being apprehended. And so we are kind of going right in the middle of him having come back and having been accused of profaning the temple in chapter 21, and then chapter 22 he speaks in a bold manner to the people and gives his testimony. And whenever he came to the place where he said that God sent him to the Gentiles, they just kind of cut loose on him, to the point that had not some people stepped in that had authority of the land, they probably would have just ripped him apart right there. So after the uproar was at least for momentarily kind of ceased, it starts into chapter 23. This is after he was given another opportunity, I believe, for the Jewish council and for Paul to, in a little more of a peaceable manner, come together, and then they gave Paul opportunity to speak. It ends up not being all that peaceable, but here's the context. I'll read it in the New Living Translation. Paul says, gazing intently at the high council, Paul began, "Brothers, I have always lived before God with a clear conscience." Instantly, Ananias the high priest commanded those close to Paul, "Slap him on the mouth." But Paul said to him, God will slap you, you corrupt hypocrite. What kind of a judge are you to break the law yourself by ordering me struck like that? Those standing near Paul said to him, Do you dare to insult God's high priest? I'm sorry, brothers, I did not realize he was the high priest, Paul replied. For the scriptures say, you must not speak evil of any of your rulers. Probably out of the different things that I could see throughout chapters 23 and 24, this one was the one that I had to research the most to really try to figure out what all was going on there. And what I could tell was that Josephus, the historian, would say that there was a time here where the high priest office was in confusion. And of course, no one could just definitely say that there was a confusion who was the high priest, or if there even was a high priest right at that time. But it helped me, and it helped people that are historians to figure out why Paul would not have known that he is the high priest. It sounds like Paul thought he had some kind of authority to judge matters, but not that he was the high priest. And it's quite likely that would be the case, but it also dawned on me how that Paul had been out of Jerusalem for quite a while, and so he probably wasn't informed on everything that was going on. But more likely it's the first reasoning. There just wasn't really a definite high priest. According to what I could see, high priests were identified by their garb. And we all know Paul was rich in that culture as far as knowledge and understanding. If the high priest would have been wearing that garb, he would have known it. So quite likely it was a matter of confusion about the high priest office at that time. Even that is not all that grounded, at least not in my mind. Either way, it explains to me that Paul was a well, I'd say balanced, but even more like he was really complete in the area of boldness versus true temperance, and boldness versus complete humility. In his boldness, preaching to crowds, preaching to kings and officials and stuff, he still had a humble character about himself. And in his conscience, he still had a desire to do what the scriptures talked about in the Old Testament. Let's see here, I have a few verses, like in Exodus 22, verse 20, is basically what Paul was quoting. Do not dare to insult God's high priest. I mean, it might read a bit different there, but I think that would have been Paul's desire, is that he wouldn't insult him, but that simply he would just say the truth. And if there is insult taken out of that, then that's on the high priest's end. But at least Paul on his end didn't showed humility. He showed that he himself can make mistakes and was willing to take full responsibility and even publicly acknowledge that this was his mistake. He didn't then just flip or flop. He stayed true with a single eye. He consistently kept speaking truth. In love, he kept talking to the people. That seems to be a lot of the rest of the chapters here in Acts. It's Paul just explaining himself, and so we can see that in his apology here, he wasn't turning into, something that now would just not even speak truth at all, being that he made a mistake. So I think that's a good example for us. God needs faithful men like that today, that know how to bring together truth and love, and how to bring together humility and boldness, and have a completeness about themselves whenever it comes to judging heavy matters, when it comes to public speaking, and preaching for Christ. There are some verses that I thought I'd cover here. We all know about Romans 13, but this probably was another desire that Paul had, was just to bring that out. Paul himself was the one that taught us Romans chapter 13, and these things are for us. It says, let everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling what God has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. The authorities are God's servants, sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. So you must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but also to keep a clear conscience. Pay your taxes too, for these same reasons, for government workers need to be paid. They are serving God in what they do. Give to everyone what you owe them. Pay your taxes and government fees to those who collect them, and give respect and honor to those who are in authority. The same man that taught us this also taught us that unless I'm thinking Peter, at least Peter for sure said something like, shall we fear you more than God? Whenever they were caught and apprehended, Peter and John, they're in Acts chapter 4. Somehow we need to figure out with great wisdom and godly understanding the difference between that. We need to understand that the secular authorities have a position, but the higher position is God's position, God's order, God's authority. Also want to point out in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, for the Lord's sake, respect all human authority, whether the king as head of state or officials as he has appointed. For the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong and to honor those who do right. Now it's important to note along these scriptural lines that a lot of people read these words, things here that Peter said about submitting to authorities, and they twist it, they pervert it to bring on a different cause. I think the cause of these scriptures is just simply to recognize that we are to pray for kings. We're not to speak evil of them, and not that we are to give anything close to like worship or homage or any kind of improper admiration to them, God is due for all of those things. And we're only to recognize them as those that keep some kind of an order in the land. Think of the law of Moses even in a similar way, like a secular law. Not too sure. I haven't really thought it out all that much, but I think I see similarities there. That the law of Moses was in a way, I mean, it had a higher purpose than just keeping order for the children of Israel. The Messiah was promised to come through that lineage, therefore that needed to be protected as well. But it just does seem like there might be some similarities there as well. Paul took complete responsibility for any careless words that he might have spoken without having properly thought it through. And we can learn from that. I need to train myself in those things better and more. Something I can teach my family on more. We sing that song quite a lot, and there's just so much truth in that song about careless words. They're lightly spoken, bitterest thoughts are rashly stirred. Bright as links of life are broken. And so it goes. So heat the tongue. Yeah, I want to move on to verses 6. It says, Paul realized that some members of the high council were Sadducees, some were Pharisees. So he shouted, Brothers, I am a Pharisee, as were my ancestors, and I am on trial because my hope is in the resurrection of the dead. Here Paul took the liberty to speak on a touchy subject. Don't know that he knew the outcome would be this way or not, but it says after he recognized that the members of the council were some Sadducees and some were Pharisees, he went ahead and did this. I'm not at all saying Paul had some evil intent in trying to divide things up. There just are some things that need to be exposed in religious circles that wrong emphasis are damaging. I think that's one thing that the Pharisees had here, the Sadducees. Like, there are some things that just need to be divided over. They need to be exposed. There need to be more things like Paul boldly speaking into groups to where they would look to the weightier matters of life. There was other things that divided the Pharisees and the Sadducees, not just the resurrection of the dead. It seems like, if I remember right, the Sadducees were a little more liberal in the areas of acknowledging other religions and not as quick to interpret and emphasize the Torah like the Pharisees were. They hardly accepted any literature outside of the Torah other than their own interpretations. And so that seemed to be another big thing between them. And some of these things, I think that Paul just saw the need that some of this needs to be exposed. Verse 7 says, This divided the council, the Pharisees against the Sadducees. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, or angels or spirits. But the Pharisees believed in all of these. So there was a great uproar. Some of the teachers of religious law who were Pharisees jumped up and began to argue fiercely. We see nothing wrong with him, they shouted. Perhaps a spirit or an angel spoke to him. Now, that seems a bit strange, just to see the Pharisees so quickly say that they see nothing wrong in him. But remember who they were speaking to. Like, they were speaking to their opponent, opposition, maybe might be a better word. I mean, generally speaking, they would not have, most of them would not have acknowledged Jesus as not having done anything wrong. They were a part of I believe that they were a part of the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish, supposedly like an official law-giving, as best as they could, like a law-giving government, which took it upon themselves to bring Jesus and the Apostle Paul into apprehension and order them whatever they want to do with them. Anyhow, they were the uproar. The Pharisees at that moment said something like, "We see nothing wrong with him," talking about Paul. And the conflict grew more violent. The commander was afraid they would tear Paul apart, so he ordered his soldiers to go and rescue him by force and take him back to the fortress. That night, the Lord appeared to Paul and said, "Be encouraged, Paul, just as you have been a witness to me here in Jerusalem, you must preach the good news in Rome as well." I don't really have it in my mind right now, but it seems like earlier Paul already was persuaded that they might have to go to Rome. He for sure was persuaded he has to go to Jerusalem. Even in the face of, I think maybe in chapter 19 and some earlier chapters, different disciples came to Paul and told him that he should not go to Jerusalem. And at one point, Paul even was like, "Are you going to break my heart? I know I have to go." And he had something. I just don't know for sure if I can completely express what it was. I think the Apostle Paul had some kind of a revelation from God on the things that were ahead of him, and he knew he had to go do them. I don't think he was trying to disrespect other disciples, his fellow workers, and those that were encouraging him not to go back to Jerusalem. Okay, verse 12. The next morning a group of Jews got together and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 of them in the conspiracy. They went to the leading priests and elders and told them, "We have bound ourselves with an oath to eat nothing until we have killed Paul. So you and the high council should ask the commander to bring Paul back to the council again. Pretend you want to examine his case more fully. We will kill him on the way." That is just so all out darkness, blackness. That is just so all out wicked. Their intent. From the depths of their heart, they hated him. And to accomplish what they wanted to do, there was deceit involved. Later on, we'll read of another deceit that was involved in Paul dealing with the people that came to him. The one governor, we'll read it yet, but the one governor said that he was hoping that Paul would pay him some money, then he would release him. And just things like that. That is just in the world. And the world lies in darkness. The world, from the beginning, has had Satan as its king, and therefore the things that he offers, things that he has in his spirit come forth. all the works of the flesh, hatred, emulations, variance, murder, all these things come from that place. And they're clearly seen right here. But God is greater and mightier. We're about to read how great and mighty God watches over His people, and in mysterious ways He brings forth His perfect plan. Verse 16 says, "But Paul's nephew, his sister's son, heard of their plan and went to the fortress and told Paul. Paul called for one of the Roman officers and said, 'Take this young man to the commander. He has something important to tell him.' So the officer did, explaining, 'Paul the prisoner called me over and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you.' The commander took his hand, led him aside, and asked, 'What is it you want to tell me?' Paul's nephew told him, 'Some Jews are going to ask you to bring Paul before the high council tomorrow, pretending,' there's their lies, there's their evil intentions, 'pretending they want to get some more information. But don't do it. There are more than 40 men hiding along the way, ready to ambush him. They have vowed not to eat or drink anything until they have killed him. They are ready now, just waiting for your consent.'" We're also about to read how this, I think maybe this very commander, or perhaps one of his fellow commanders, then ended up ordering of 200 soldiers, 70 mounted troops, and 200 spearsmen to guard Paul on his own mounted beast, it says, to take him to the next place. And I think it was because of these 40 bloodthirsty men that were hiding in the ambush. "Don't let anyone know you told me this," the commander warned the young man. Then the commander called 2 of his officers and ordered, "Get 200 soldiers ready to leave for Caesarea at 9 o'clock tonight. Also take 200 spearsmen and 70 mounted troops. Provide horses for Paul to ride on, and get him safely to Governor Felix." Then he wrote this letter to the governor. "From Claudius Lysias to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by some Jews, and they were about to kill him when I arrived with the troops. When I learned that he was a Roman citizen, I removed him to safety. Then I took him to their high council to try to learn the basis of the accusations against him. I soon discovered the charge was something regarding their religious law. Certainly nothing worthy of imprisonment or death. But when I was informed of a plot to kill him, I immediately sent him to you. I have told his accusers to bring their charges before you." So, that night, as ordered, the soldiers took Paul as far as Antipatris. They returned to the fortress the next morning, while the mounted troops took Paul to Caesarea. When they arrived in Caesarea, they presented Paul and the letter to Governor Felix. He read it and then asked Paul what province he was from. "Cilicia," Paul answered. "I will hear your case myself when your accusers arrive," the governor told him. Then the governor ordered him kept in prison at Herod's headquarters. I'm amazed at the effort that the Roman army would put in to save what in their eyes was one of their citizens, the Apostle Paul. I mean, seems like he was, in one sense, one of their citizens, but I'm not sure that they really knew exactly who it is that they're protecting. I would expect they were protecting him largely on the basis that that they need to save one of their citizens. He was one of their citizens, but his higher citizenship was not to be a Roman citizen. His citizenship was in heaven. And I think these rulers were about to find that out. We can read through here. We can see their disappointment. We can see that they are finding out who it was that they protected. Don't know if they really would have gone through the bother of putting together such a troop of soldiers and try to save him like that, had they known what he was about to tell them. So I'm going to read chapter 24 yet, and here we can see these governors just kind of, they would listen to him, and once you start talking about righteousness and judgment and things pertaining to God, they just be quick to push him off to the next governor and put him back into prison. And I think they felt like they have kind of perhaps a worthless citizen of theirs. But that's how it goes. The kings of this world have different interests, and they have different values than God. We see that over and over. "5 days later, Ananias, the high priest, arrived with some of the Jewish elders and the lawyer Tertullus to present their case against Paul to the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented the charges against Paul in the following address to the governor." So this is unfolding like the governor had said it has to. Put Paul in prison at Herod's headquarters until his accusers can make it up here. Then we'll get together and in a court matter we'll discuss what's going on here. Okay, so I'm not sure. From what I could tell, Tertullus was like a mediator or some kind of some kind of a spokesman that was usually present when there were some civil matters between the two nations, like the Jewish nation or culture and the Roman Empire. So I don't know for sure what religion he was. I mean, I think he was just presenting and representing the Jewish elders and the religious leaders. So here we go. "You have provided a long period of peace for us Jews, and with foresight have enacted reforms for us. For all of this, Your Excellency, we are very grateful to you." Butter him up. A little bit of flattery goes a long ways when you come to political matters in the world, and it's just hypocrisy at the core. It seems like it happens today with bad motives. People butter each other up, especially in these political matters. "But I don't want to bore you, so please give me your attention for only a moment. We have found this man to be a troublemaker who is constantly stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the cult known as the Nazarenes." That might have been the first surprise for the governor. He thought he possibly has a good Roman citizen here, a supportive, upright citizen. And now this lawyer, Tertullus, tells him that he is a ringleader of a cult called the Nazarenes. And he was trying to desecrate or profane or desecrate the temple when we arrested him. You can find out the truth of our accusation by examining him yourself. Then the other Jews chimed in, declaring, yeah, it was so, yeah, it was so, yeah, that's what he did, we saw him do it, and on, the accusations went. What Tertullus, our good lawyer here, is saying, that's true and right, we stand behind him. He definitely was profaning the temple, and this and that, he definitely is part of a cult, and you, fair man up here, you know we don't want cults in this country. And things like that were probably just coming forward. And, I think the governor might have smelled a rat or something, because he wasn't going to just be persuaded by their story only. Verse 10 says, the governor then motioned for Paul to speak. Paul said, I know, sir, that you have been a judge of Jewish affairs for many years. So I gladly present my defense before you. You can quickly discover that I arrived in Jerusalem no more than 12 days ago to worship at the temple. So that's another reason given for Paul to come to Jerusalem. Earlier I had said that he had come with some relief money. And I think I found that somewhere. My accusers never found me arguing with anyone in the temple, nor stirring up a riot in any synagogue, or on the streets of the city. These men cannot prove the things they accuse me of. But I admit that I follow the way, which they call a cult. I worship the God of our ancestors, and I firmly believe the Jewish law and everything written in the prophets. I expect that this time there probably would have been some Jewish elders in there shaking their head. He does not believe the Jewish law and everything written in the prophets. But this is just how easy it is for two different people to pick up the same history books, the same writings, and come up with two different conclusions. Like Paul came up with the conclusion that the Jewish laws, what the prophets wrote about, points to the Messiah, and the Messiah is Jesus. The religious leaders, on the other hand, the Pharisees would have, I believe, believed in a Messiah. I'm not sure if the Sadducees even did, but they did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And they mostly just stuck to the Torah, and the things that the prophets wrote were so much against them that I don't think they really had that much appreciation for it. Paul says, I have the same hope in God that these men have, that he will raise both the righteous and the unrighteous. Because of this, I always try to maintain a clear conscience before God and all people. After several years away, I returned to Jerusalem. Okay. It's like saying, after being away from Jerusalem for several years, I returned to Jerusalem with money to aid my people and to offer sacrifices to God. My accusers saw me in the temple as I was completing a purification ceremony. There was no crowd around me and no rioting. And I think we could find evidence of that. Paul came back to Jerusalem. He spoke with the elders, especially James. And, I think he already had intent to do offers and sacrifice. It was the reason he had given in Ephesus why he's making the trip. But even more, I think once he got there, he really was encouraged by other disciples or by other believers to do certain sacrifice, to show that he still has an appreciation for some of those things, even though I think by that time it was largely being understood that the gospel, the message, the good news about that Jesus brought wasn't the law of Moses. There was still something they couldn't just easily shed, like in one day or in 1 week or in 1 year. People still had appreciation for it, and therefore Paul, like his desire was, when he was among the Jews, he would try to be like a Jew, so he could win the Jews. When he was amongst I think it says like the unbelievers, he would figure out ways to be like them, to win them, not to be like their sin in any way, but still to show respect and a proper appreciation. And I think that's what he was doing in Jerusalem. And he was already a marked person by the religious leaders in Jerusalem. And I think it was just a matter of Paul coming back and facing them again. Remember where he comes from. Remember, like, he was one of them and he left them to preach a message to the Gentiles that was never done before. And so he was largely marked out by those in Jerusalem. When he came back, these were the accusations that were thrown at him. Verse 19, but some Jews from the province of Asia were there, and they ought to be here to bring charges if they have anything against me. Ask these men here what crime the Jewish high priest found me guilty of. Except for the one time I shouted out, I am on trial before you today because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And I'm sure to a governor of that empire at that day, what's the difference whether, I'm not, like the governor would be something like, I'm not even set up to judge whether it's right or wrong in this office to condemn such a one. If that's all he did was to raise his voice on his opinion about the afterlife. And so I think Felix was ready just to end it. At that point, Felix, who was quite familiar with the way, adjourned the hearing and said, wait until Lysias, the garrison commander, arrives. Then I will decide the case. He ordered an officer to keep Paul in custody, but to give him some freedom and allow his friends to visit him and take care of his needs. Lysias was, I believe, the very man that put together the army, the troops, to take him to Caesarea. And so, it sounds like he was scheduled to come to Caesarea, and then until that time came, Paul was just kept in custody. Not in the stocks, not bound by some accusation, but just in custody as a man at question, and to be decided upon later. 24. A few days later, Felix came back with his wife, Priscilla, who was Jewish. Sending for Paul, they listened as he told them about the faith in Jesus Christ. As he reasoned with them about righteousness, self-control, and the coming day of judgment, Felix became frightened. Go away for now, he replied. When it is more convenient, I will call for you again. And I would just say, what a shallow man. Like, what a leader's that? But that's what earthly leaders do. They have a different agenda. The judgment of God is not something to ponder on, not something to consider they're right with God or not. It's all about their empire and how they can build up their empire. So he pushed him off. He did not want to hear about righteousness. He did not want to hear about self-control. Not too sure why, but other than just they have a different agenda. He also hoped that Paul would bribe him. Here it is. He also hoped that Paul would bribe him. That means a bribe is give him some money. He hoped that Paul would give him some money, so he sent for him quite often and talked with him. I think the meeting was closed to where the accusers were done. They got to say what they were going to say. They went back, probably to Jerusalem, and Felix would bring him out every once in a while. Not with a very good intention, not with a very good motive, but with the love of money, he brought him out and would talk with him. After 2 years went by in this way, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and because Felix wanted to gain favor with the Jewish people, he left Paul in prison. It just usually comes out like Pilate wanted to please both crowds, and it usually just comes out which crowd you're pleasing. Whether you're going to please those that are of the way, that's called the cult, like Paul referred to himself as following the way, the Jesus way, you might say. Or whether you're following the crowd, in this case, I think Festus just had to make up his mind whether he's going to continue working with his lawyer, Tertullus, working with the Jewish people, and it ends up that the man that they were so much about protecting, so much about getting safely from here to there, because he was one of their citizens, he now ends up putting him into prison, leaving him in prison, because he actually wanted to do a favor to these Jewish people. That's probably all I'll I don't really know if I'll expound much more on these verses. I want to turn to some other scriptures. I maybe took a little more time than I thought doing this, but I did want to read some other scriptures about if we can track with the Apostle Paul through these chapters and just to see what he had. I think he had something. Let's go to Luke chapter 12 real quick and just read some things there that I think were deeply engrafted in his heart, and it brought him through these hard things where he was just not going to be moved by anything that these earthly nations were going to put out there. I think I'll just read Luke chapter 12 down to verse 7 or 8. Meanwhile, the crowds grew until thousands were milling about and stepping on each other. Jesus turned first to his disciples and warned them, "Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, their hypocrisy. The time is coming when everything that is covered will be revealed, and all that is secret will be made known to all. Whatever you have said in dark will be heard in light, and what you have whispered behind closed doors will be shouted from the housetops for all to hear." Like these evil intentions that these Jewish people, especially just consider those 40 men that had decided they're not going to eat or drink before they have killed him. Those intentions will be out in the open for all to see one day. And even though they're hidden things, they will be exposed. And even though it seemed like a precise, planned out attack, that we're gonna use discipline our own bodies to the point that it emphasizes or it promotes us to seek that goal of killing that man. What do you think happened with him? They didn't get him killed. They either had to admit that, and I think that's part of the revealing, like the revealing of their foolish actions. I hope they repented. I don't know if they did or not, but the Apostle Paul made it all the way out to Rome. Those 40 men never got him killed. Either they starved to death because of their commitment to kill him, or they owned up to their foolish commitment. They're like, well, he got away, we're going to have to eat. Like, that's how it goes. That's just how it goes. And foolish commitments are just foolish commitments that will be revealed one day. Verse 4, and somewhere in there is kind of what I had wanted to really emphasize on. Dear friends, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They cannot do any more to you after that. But I'll tell you who to fear. Fear God, who has the power to kill you and then throw you into hell. Yes, He's the one to fear. I believe that is the fear of God that we are to have. That thing that acknowledges that we are going to give account for every word that we say, every action that we do, every decision that we make. One day the book will be open and it'll all be revealed. That's the one to fear, the one that has that ability. Those that can only throw sticks and stones, I mean, it's all they can do. It's not the ultimate end. What is the price of 5 sparrows, 2 copper coins? Yet God does not forget a single one of them. Throughout this, I'm sure the Apostle Paul knew that somehow in the darkest moment of that prison, he knew that he has more value than the price of 5 sparrows or 2 copper coins, and that God did not forget it. And the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than the whole flock of sparrows. I tell you the truth, anyone who acknowledges me publicly here on earth, the Son of Man will also acknowledge in the presence of God's angels. I'm sure that was a part of his steadfast commitment, acknowledging God publicly. Acknowledging God publicly. It's all worth it. Like, as he sat in prison, it's all worth it. I gotta acknowledge him. Because he wanted to be acknowledged by God's angels. But anyone who denies me here on earth will be denied before God's angels. Anyone who speaks against the Son of Man can be forgiven, but anyone who blasphemes the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. And when you are brought to trial in the synagogues and before rulers and authorities, don't worry about how to defend yourself or what to say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you at that time what needs to be said. John chapter 14. I want to cover a few verses here of be something along the lines of encouragement. I thought in closing I would just maybe speak a little bit on the kind of the pandemic that's at hand and the thoughts that I've had about it. And I don't know. Of course I don't know, but I can at least express my thoughts a little bit. There's just things that are going to be shaken here on this earth. And I think of Hebrews chapter 12 where it displays that thought about things that are shakeable need to be shaken so that those things that cannot be shaken will stand. And there's just some promises here that I think will stand. They just will be truth when everything else around is not truth, and it will be shaken. I just think that maybe God is working something like that in this pandemic, and I hope people are able to see that. Verse 18 says, I will not leave. Let me read it in the New Living. I will not abandon you as orphans. I will come to you. Soon the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Since I live, you also will live. And it's that verse just caught my attention, just how Jesus left this world. He promised his return. That's another one of those things that just will stand. It's one of those promises that just will come true. If we think things just keep going on, nothing changes that much, and beware, the day is coming. Like a thief in the night on one hand, but on the other hand, there's things that we can see unfold, perhaps. I don't have the explanations of all that as it approaches, but just be encouraged by the fact that God is wanting to shake things that need to be shaken, so that the things that cannot be shaken can be like revealed, or that they can stand. And that's what we need to grasp on. That's what we need to have our faith in. God bless you all.